I'm Molly Archer-Smith. I was Molly Dean of Imber, and I was born in the house behind me. The house belongs to a General Seagram. It always did until the War Office bought it. My father was a tenant farmer there. He was never allowed to buy the place. He lived there for 200 years.
I'm Frank Marsh. I lived here till 1940 when I was called up for the Air Force. And during that time, during the war, they turned the people from the village out, and when I came back it was just a ruin. I met an officer that was in the School of Infantry in Wiltshire, and he gave me a pass to come here to visit the village. Well, we didn't know what to think. The way they knocked it to pieces. The army promised to let the villagers back here after the war, but of course here today and still not back here to live.
Mrs. Marsh, I never knew of anything else but Mrs. Marsh. She'd never seen the sea, and I think for years she never went beyond her garden fence. One of them had never seen a train. We used to get flooded every 4 years, have some stilts or a boat or Wellingtons. And then when it snowed, and we got snowed in, Father used to send a horse and cart to Lavington with orders from the different people in the village if they wanted some food.
It only flooded in the winter, and some of the houses, I've heard the old people say, that they even had to put wattle hurdles down in their ground floor to walk on. They had no main drainage, they had no water laid on. Most of them were relying on oil lamps, I think, and candles to go to bed with, you see.
Imber was clean and green and sweet. Remember when the first reaper came through Imber, everybody followed around looking at it. Until then, the men came behind and made a twist of straw and put that round the sheaves, and they were thrown out.
Well, the hunts used to meet at our place, at the Hooper's place and the court, and they used to hunt all over the place here. And then we used to have our hunt balls in the middle of the season and at Christmas. Very nice, thank you.
And if they were haymaking, we'd make houses of banks of hay with a living room and a kitchen, and have tins and make pastry and do all sorts of... Children don't do that sort of thing now.
They were real village cricketers, and it used to be a very social occasion. Well, I mean, sometimes, we have been known to be bowled out for about 8 runs. We used to play a lot of tennis. And there were, 4 farms here, and we used to have 4 courts. There used to be about 70 people come, and we used to run cars between each court. And, of course, we used to do a lot of shooting in those days. And we used to have shooting parties. And then they'd all change and go up for dinner, and then we'd play cards up till about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd play either Farmer's Glory or Nap.
Going back to old Frank Daniels' day, when he was a young man, one day the regular organist couldn't attend for some reason. He was taking ill or something. So he said to one of the younger ones, "Thee's got to play." I said to the choir, if he'd a jack out, these kept singing. And I said to he, if they can't find all the notes, vol over them and hit on again.
Oh, we did have a policeman once. We had a policeman once. He was a very nice man. He came over from Concord, I think. But some boys had attacked him one day, poor old thing, and really hurt him. So we had no policeman after that at all. It was all right. We were a very law-abiding country, village, really.
It would have been very difficult for the likes of you and I to go there, but certainly not for the old people, because that was they were so used to it. See, they didn't know anything else.
As weapons became more powerful, formal training areas came about, and the first land to be purchased specifically for that was Aldershot, and Salisbury Plain came later in bits and pieces, in parcels of land.
It's true to say that the army already owned Imber, because in the years between 1921 and 27, they had managed one by one to pick off the easy ones first. When they managed to buy the Bell, and the Baptist chapel, but the Church of England, thank goodness, never gave in. The land on which the church stands does not belong to the army.
You could hear them firing in all directions, but the farm fields were left that they could be harvested. They didn't come close into the village at that time.
And as there was the agricultural depression then, it was not too bad a price. And they said if we didn't agree to it, they could bring valuers down from Scotland where the land was pretty poor, and we'd have to go on those valuations.
Dad was a blacksmith. Well, as far as I know, he left Imber when he was about 14. Well, because he wanted to be apprenticed to be a blacksmith, and I don't think there was anybody at Imber that could teach him.
As a farming community, then obviously it was going to die because they didn't want so many people on the land, you see. I think the people were already leaving, particularly the younger ones.
The part of the training area for which I'm responsible, that's what is known commonly as the Imber Ranges, or Salisbury Plain Training Area West, included the village of Imber, which was inhabited, and a number of other farmhouses which were inhabited. But as the volume of live firing increased, it became necessary for certainly the outlying farms to be closed down. And eventually, in 1943, in the preparations for the landings in Normandy, for the occupants of Imber, most of whom were MOD tenants, to have their tenancies terminated and for them to leave the village.
When the War Department said that they wanted to evacuate the village because they needed it for training for the Americans, there was no question that people wouldn't move, because patriotism was such that one didn't question it. Especially, it was understood that it should be given back when the Americans left. Actually, a letter exists which is very ambiguous, because it's written into that, or when it should be no longer required, sort of thing. It was absolutely devastating, because it meant in one fell swoop all our grazing land for the sheep went. We lost 1,000 acres of grazing, which meant that although it was November, the sheep had to be sold. And for a flock which had gone on down through generations, this was really awful. We had bought in our rams for breeding in September, and it meant that those rams had also to be sold. Well, there was no sale for them in November. No one wanted them.
What they did was, a corporal came round one morning on a Thursday, and he handed each person in each house a written notice. It had the War Office stamp on the top, and they said on this notice that the people would have to move out for the duration of the war. There was one man who was on his way to Devizes Market, being a Thursday. He took the notice, got his pony and trap, and he went to Devizes. Now, after that, in the evening, well, about 5 o'clock, a major came round, and he collected all these notices up. They were told verbally, by word of mouth, they would probably come back that harvest.
They left everything in their gardens. Well, country people would never leave fruit trees in their gardens if they could be moved. They take them with them.
And I cycled up to see the poor old souls before they went. And I went and saw them, and we got out. Whenever you went there, it was, Lochamassy, here's our Jane coming. That was my grandmother, you see. Lord have mercy. Lochamassy, here's our Jane coming. I think she went to Broughton Gifford to stay with her daughter, but she didn't live very long after that.
They were to move out on the 17th of December.
3 weeks' notice.
And they wanted to go over Christmas, so that they could have Christmas at the Bell, the pub, and they were all going to have a great time. But no, they had to be gone by the 17th.
They were all very upset, very, very upset. The old people were. I don't think the younger ones bothered very much. They'd gone out in the world more, and got jobs out in Warminster and Devizes and places like that, you see. The old people, that was their home. You understand, they never went anywhere, or very few of them did.
They wanted it so that they could possess the whole of the Salisbury Plain.
After 1943, of course, the village was used for bombing, for strafing from aircraft, for shelling by artillery and mortars, and all other forms of live firing.
Mr. Dean went to Imber with the American colonel who was in charge of it all, who showed him the village of Imber as it then was, and it was in good enough condition people could have gone straight back in. But within a fortnight of the Americans going, there was what I would only now term vandalism. At Imber Court, Major Whistler left his big cheval grass there. That had machine gun bullets right across the middle of it. Then there was vandalism in the church, and there was an inquiry about that.
Another young man, he went in the Navy. He came back thinking he was going back to his mother and father. There was no house there. His parents were not there. He had no idea where they were.
But what raised the ire of people who were interested in Imber was that the War Department suggested moving the church stone by stone to Warminster to become a garrison church. We weren't having that at all.
I, one day, thought, well, I'd do the round of Imber, which was forbidden technically. Going through there, and we noticed smoke coming from one of the old council houses. And so I went in there alone. I said, who gave you permission to smash up these houses? And the sergeant said, well, we're all doing it, sir.
Imber had been closed under DORA, the Defence of the Realm Act. And that was an act for 20 years' duration. That was coming to the end, but the War Department was applying for further closure. So it was decided, really, at the instigation of Austin Underwood from Amesbury, that we should form, if possible, some association to fight this continued closure.
The army said there was nothing in writing. This question was brought up about the notices that they could come back after hostilities had finished. The gentleman who went to Devizes in his trap had that notice in his pocket, and when he heard that we were forming an association and we were going to try and help the people of Imber, he very kindly turned up with this notice. There was a big protest meeting eventually, and there were over 200 people who came, and it was headed by a most marvellous gentleman, Lord Bath. He was a wonderful fellow, so tall and elegant and military looking, you know. And so we were marched all up through here, no vehicles, just everybody walking. Poor old Lord Bath, he'd lost a leg in the First World War. So of course he could only walk about 100 yards and his leg gave out. So my cousin Norris Hooper went and got a tractor, and put him up on the tractor, and away we went in great style. But Perfumer at that time was Minister of War. He apparently gave the order that we should be stopped. So, if you please, 2 aeroplanes came out and buzzed us, and people had to lie down on the ground. True. It was ridiculous. I mean, we were treated like criminals. I was getting most ridiculous letters, private letters, headed letters, solicitors' letters.
Now, Mr. Weaver, who lived in Devizes and was the organist at St. John's Church, he found his house had military intelligence people outside. They escorted him to church. They sat in the organ loft and wouldn't let him out of their sight. But they got an injunction against the association to stop us.
The injunction was served on me personally, the treasurer personally, and the vice chairman personally of the Association for the Restoration of Imber. It restrained us from entering army territory surrounding the village of Imber. The injunction still in force. I met my solicitor the other day, he's retired by now. He said, look, Austin, you've got an injunction against you on Imber still, haven't you? I said, yes. He said, well, we'll get that lifted. I said, no, you don't. I want to show who your solicitor is. I said, let it remain. I said, every time I go to Imber, let the War Office try and to exercise the injunction.
Running around a different car in those days, and if anybody saw that car coming in around the gates, they'd send somebody down to stop us, to the jeep, and the warden would come down on your way.
Of course, we were doing all this without any funds, and the people who aided us in a great many ways was the League Against Cruel Sports, because hunting was still carrying on all the time that Imber was, so say, closed. And when we had this inquiry, which was held at the County Hall at Trowbridge, the League Against Cruel Sports paid for our counsel.
So what are you going to do about this notice, your lordship? I pointed at him. He said, well, we should deal with this. We should deal with this and not be hearing from us. I said, how soon and when? Because the people are waiting. And this was a fact. All the residents and their descendants and people, they were furious about it. Look, when I did get in touch with Nugent, it was some months afterwards, through Johnson, he was then moved from that particular thing. I have nothing more to do with it. He was not hearing it more. And nobody wanted to know what the notes were about or anything else. It was a definite cover-up. I'm prepared to stand in a witness box and on oath.
The association was branded as CND supporters, which we weren't. We weren't conscientious objectors and all this business at all. But the army made full play of that. I did have a letter from a Greenham Common lady who said that she was being prosecuted for trespass because she'd climbed into the churchyard, somehow or other got through the fence. And she wanted to know if I would go to court and speak as a witness for her, because she felt that she was on consecrated ground and consequently she wasn't trespassing. I would have none of it because I felt that that isn't helping anybody's cause. Imber had a very long history. A very long history, and it seemed as though they were trying to uproot everything of the past. Imber is mentioned in Doomsday, and whilst it was a village which was tucked away down in the downs on its own, it was a community, and it seemed as though they were trying to eradicate it. And they succeeded, really.
The ordnance map for about a year just showed roads going into an area not even marked Imber.
I was told that Imber came from the Latin umbra or something similar, and that means wet. And there was a barrow there, so that must have been ancient. It was called the Barrow Field.
This was happening not in some Polish village, but here in the heart of Salisbury Plain. And I pointed out that there had been communities at Imber since about 6000 BC.
There are a number of measures well established which we take to ensure that the state of the archaeological features as they are now are preserved through a consultation with archaeologists, through a committee which is jointly formed with the army, its land agent and the archaeologists, which have instituted a number of management plans to protect those features which are thought worth protecting.
When they were digging a dew pond, because Imber had their dew pond makers, of course, when they were digging a pond back between Imber and Heytesbury, they dug, and they dug their usual large depression and came across what was evidently a burial ground. And there were a lot of skeletons in it, and they think it was possibly from some wartime, ancient wartime burial thing.
My cousin about 6 times back in the past, I can't remember exactly what his name was, it could have been Samuel, but definitely a religious name. But he used to help out on dew ponds, used to help building them, but it was a trade in those days, along with shepherding.
When Charlie White retired from dew pond making, there was a great disgrace because Jabez Early carried on, and the first pond he made leaked, and Charlie White had to be brought back from retirement to put it right.
We come here every Saturday nearest the 1st of September, which is St. Giles' Day, and we have a Eucharist at 12 and evensong at 3 o'clock, and between 200 and 300 people come.
A few years back, the army said they wanted it that day for manoeuvres, and there was a terrible outcry. and they promised they wouldn't do that again.
Imber has two churchyards. One which is the normal Church of England one, which, however, the church is closed, but the churchyard is still open to the public once a year in September. The non-conformist graveyard has been forgotten about. So I thought, well, this is right to the military. And I wrote to the Ministry of Defence in London, to the military at Warminster, and in the end to the Land Department at Durrington. And I had no. So I asked them why. They said, well, security reasons, we cannot allow people to tramp around. So I kept pressing, and in the end they said yes, but only after I threatened to go to the press about it. And we were escorted by military police and land wardens, totaling about 14. I found one family grave that I could identify, my great-grandfather. I know that John Pierce was, like most people from the village, a farm worker, worked on the land for the local landlord. And his wife, she done the normal duties of those days. She took in washing and ironing for about £1 a week. I know they were very, very strong Baptists.
There are a number of people for whom access to the whole of the plain is given, in particular the Imber Conservation Group. The MOD has a conservation officer in London, and each training area has its own conservation group, usually chaired by a serving army officer, but the subgroup leaders are invariably civilian, and they organise their groups as they see fit.
On the maps we have right away, but of course the bylaws that govern Imber prevent members of the public from going across except for on certain days, and then we are then supposed to remain on the footpaths within the village. I wouldn't want to cross the plain because it'd be unwise to do so, but of course people do.
Well, if the red flags are flying, we mustn't go anywhere into the danger area. And the danger area is defined with danger boards every 100 metres or so, all around the whole of the plain. And you mustn't go inside of that, and if you do, it's at your risk and you're liable to get shot. Well, they do fire actually over the roads, from the Imber ranges through to the Larkhill ranges, over the A360. It's once or twice a month.
It is a reasonable argument to say that sections of Salisbury Plain at least have been preserved from, for example, pesticides, fertilisers, herbicides, by the fact it hasn't been farmed and it has been under military control. But I mean, that is really pure chance. I mean, obviously if you're testing tanks over an area of land, you're not going to be farming it at the same time. There's no reason now why, because that's happened, the army has to be the organisation that conserves it further.
In 1991, Mr. Heseltine decided that the political boundary, parish boundary for Imber would be removed and that Imber would be grouped together with Heytesbury. And the reason for that was that there was no population in the political parish.
It was done without any consultation with local councils, as far as I'm concerned, and local people that matter. We weren't asked at all. The first I knew about it on the council was reading through an agenda for a committee and seeing Imber will be no longer a parish, to the report to be noted, full stop. I think Imber will remain military until long after I've gone and my children have gone. I think it's here with the military forever. I can foresee the graveyards just falling into disrepair and overgrown with weeds, and bang, it's gone. Maybe they have prevented it from being developed because it could be a prime building spot for outsiders, as we call them, or yuppies, to come along and build £100,000 houses.
The Second World War has ended, the Cold War has ended, and yet still the army has this massive land holding on Salisbury Plain, and the idea that we have is that Imber and the area coming down from Imber off Salisbury Plain towards Warminster would be transferred to civilian use. Sections would become a site of special scientific interest because they're very, very unusual plant and bird life there. And other sections would be returned to the people or the descendants of the people who lived there before the land was taken.
There are no Imber people to go back now, so why bother? What's their interest?
Well, Imber itself, Imber village itself, was never really a Cold War village. It is a village based on the Belfast streets in Ireland.
Well, I don't feel anything now. The only thing I hope is that they won't develop it. Let it go back to nature.
This is something that a democratic state should never, ever have done. It was a thing which even the Germans would not have done.
Today, with these modern weapons they got, why do they need so much of this land? It runs from Perham down to Westbury Boyd Horse, all military land. Now, why do they need so much of it?
There's no doubt about it. The track vehicles do a certain amount of damage, but equally, the land does recover reasonably quickly. And we also have a program of rehabilitation of those most badly damaged areas carried out by our land agent, where the land is restored as best we can to what it was before. It's a nice place to be. I've been here 6 years.
And we still intend to start it all over again. Well, we've got the documents. We've got the important document of where they've reneged on their promise to let these people back. They've had plenty of opportunity to do so. And I shall also emphasise the fact that they're depleting the forces to a very great extent. They've got other ranges which these people can train upon. And it's quite, I feel that they're retaining it so that the army generals and people can retain their jobs.
Well, the only ghost story I knew was at the court, with Mrs. Wadman. And I was up there one day with Tom Dean, and I was saying how very, very cold it was going up the stairs. And he said, "Oh, don't bother, that's only Mrs. Wadman. She goes up and down, but she doesn't hurt anybody." The vicarage was haunted, I didn't know, but apparently the troops would never stay there. So they pulled it down. Which is rather a shame, because it was a most beautiful building.